So in chapter one, David Buss starts talking about this idea of the battle of the sexes. And he begins with the Me Too movement and talking about how this has really captured the local environment and the zeitgeist of the times. And it's also led to things related to toxic masculinity, the manosphere, incels, and all other types of cultural signals that really have to do with this idea of sexual selection that we talked about in the past video. And to be sure, masculinity, and if you read, as I hope you all did, read Walter's book, he talks about this idea of toxic masculinity, or the hegemony that men have over women. And certainly masculinity does have these toxic elements, but on their own, masculinity, femininity, neither of those things are bad things. They're not inherently something that we don't want to have in society. However, there are elements of masculinity and of femininity that can be toxic, that can be detrimental to society. So we have to think about those things. And also we have to reconcile that many women, as we'll see in the research, are attracted to men that have power, status, influence, resources. And often those are individuals that are more masculine in how they present. So there are advantages to being masculine and even having some elements of toxic masculinity. And what this leads to is this idea of sexual conflict coevolution, that for every tactic one sex, and it could be men, it could be females, for every tactic they evolve to exploit the other sex when it comes to sexual selection, there exists a co-evolved or a response to that tactic. So if males develop a certain tactic, females over time will develop a counter tactic or a defense against that. And this really leads to this co-evolution over long periods of time of tactics that one sex uses over the other to gain an advantage in passing on their genes, sexual selection. And oftentimes people liken this to the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland, that she has her feet going over and over again, but she never really gets anywhere. And this is that co-evolution of tactics that really bounce back and forth over long periods of time between men and women. And what we see when we look at the research is that most women find the average man to be below threshold. So this would be, like the rating of a 4 through 6, rating score out of a 1 through 10, and really show attraction to men in the top 20%. So females can be pretty selective. Us men, we're not very valuable, to be honest with you, in terms of sexual selection and passing on genes. It really only takes one or a few men to pass on genes if we're talking about mating with several different women. So women can be selective, and research shows that they mostly show attraction to that top 20%. And one thing that is different on average, and so in these videos and in this book, and David Buss specifically says this, is that we're talking about averages, generalities. So on average, XYZ. Not every woman is the same. Not every man is the same. And while there are differences between men and women, those differences vary in degree. So always remember that we're talking about generalities. We're talking about averages. So the first thing here, women often require more time than men to accurately assess the other's mate value on average, right? And so we see this here in terms of the time elapsed before seeking intercourse. And it could be a variety of other things too. Remember, having a child is a huge investment for females. And in our culture nowadays, we have co-parenting. It can be very time and resource investing for both men and women. But think about carrying a child for 10 months, basically. That's a huge investment for females. So they want to make sure that they are investing their time and their efforts in a partner that will reciprocate over the long term as they are carrying that child to term. And so there is a battle over women's bodies because women can reproduce. And if men want to have children, they want to reproduce, and they want to pass on their genetic material, they have to find a mate. They have to find a choosy woman. And that I'm saying that is a good thing. And David Buss is saying that is a good thing because women are selecting somebody that they can trust, that has good quote unquote genetic stock, that they want to have children with. And so, as he says here, David Buss, and you can think back to Walter, feminist theories correctly observe that men do objectify women's bodies. And for David Buss, the reason is sexual selection. They want to have children with women who are also good providers, have good genetic material, meaning that they're attractive, that they work and produce for the family and take care of those children. So sexual objectification does inflict a cost on women. And in our culture nowadays, it ranges from eating disorders, hiring practices, promotions within companies, leading to promotion discrimination. So feminist theories have a strong connection with and should be included in a lot of what we do with biological and psychological theories writ large. And so he looks back at a lot of these societies and he focuses in here on the Tiwi of Northern Australia. And what we see here is women are used as currency. They don't have dollars and cents per se, but what is their resource that they value is women. And so he says here, Tiwi means the people. And this type of idea, and I think Walter would agree, is not just American culture. It's not just Australian culture. It's cultures all around the globe. That a resource to any society and any culture are women. And it certainly is something that we still value in our society. Unfortunately, in our culture now, we're thinking more broadly and more nuanced about human resources and getting to this idea of social justice and economic justice and rights for everybody. So this is a baseline fundamental evolutionary perspective, and we now have more cultural perspectives and sociological viewpoints that now bring in what we should be bringing in, which is this idea of justice and fairness and equity. So again, remember that this chapter here is really baseline fundamental biological argument. And so in this culture, there's extreme polygyny, so multiple sex partners. And it's also called reproductive skew in evolutionary biology. And it's rather rare for traditional hunter-gatherer groups. And one of the things that we see in here is widow remarriage. The idea that some men acquire their first wife much, much later on, and they take a widow of someone that's already passed away. So the people that are getting access to females tend to be young, more masculine, more virulent. And so they're passing on their genetic material in that culture, in that society. And the men that don't have access to those females, they may get remarried or married for the first time much later on in life when they're not passing on genetic material, but they can still be a provider for that woman. So lacking a cash economy, the Tiwi culture treat women as a key currency in their society. And the central notion being that women embody the most important resource and men compete over that resource. Sexual jealousy is very high. It's a key conflict within mateships. And it's really a universal emotion that is brought forth when there's a threat to a valued relationship. Now think about this. This is the Tiwi culture, but if you look at homicide, you look at aggravated assaults, you look at gang conflicts, all of this violent crime and antisocial behavior that takes place today, a lot of it is over relationships. It's over someone that cheated on somebody else, someone hit on someone else's girlfriend, someone's masculinity was challenged. Even today, and in cultures, regardless if it's middle class or lower class or upper class, this jealousy and sexual selection is a key part to why there is violent conflict in today's society. And as he says here, conflict is costly. When you're doing battle, you could be fighting, it could be stealing, it could be arguing, it could be trying to ruin somebody at their job. It can be maladaptive for both sexes. However, over the long term and in our evolutionary history, you had to step up for yourself. You had to protect your masculinity. You had to protect your reputation. And if anyone challenged you or try to get access to your family, your girlfriend, your wife, your sexual partner, you had to challenge that other person. Otherwise, there was no hope for you of having a long-term mate and passing on your genetic material. So genetic evolution is a slow process, and cultural evolution is pretty swift. Think about the Me Too movement. It happened quickly. And cultural ideas, this idea of equal rights in environmental and social justice and equal rights for women, this stuff develops fairly quickly, over years and decades, where evolution develops over tens and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. And as he says here, sexual jealousy is a universal human emotion. It is variable in its expression. So how do you express that jealousy? Is it gossip? Is it violence? Is it coming together as a society and determining what to do when there's a violation of this? So the expression is variable, but it's a universal emotion present in all cultures. And sexual jealousy evolved as just one solution to this idea of this adaptive challenge of someone disrespecting you or trying to move in on a sexual relationship. So there's a lot of studies that have been done here, and go through this book. It's really, really interesting. But one of the things they did is they brought in men to a physiological lab, and they asked those individuals. So physiology is like your emotional response system. It's sweating, it's shaking, it's a raising of heart rate. And the researchers asked those individuals to imagine their wives or their girlfriends, whoever they were having sex with, that they were taking a pill, like a contraceptive, and they said to imagine that sexual partner having sex with another man. Like they're on the pill, so it's very unlikely that they're going to get pregnant, but they said still think about that, right? That they are having sex with another man, and their physiological distress levels spiked. Their heart rate went up, they sweat, they had frowning. And so this was across the board on these men that were asked to imagine that. There was a strong this physiological reaction. Why? Because that is a significant threat to the culture that is built around sexual selection for men. So there is this, what he calls this evolutionary arms race and a cultural arms race over sexual conflict. How do we express it, and how do we solve those conflicts when they arise? So when we're looking at differences between males and females in some of this conflict, we do see that men who maintain maximal proximity are able to exert power over women. And we see this in culture. And especially we see this in what we call detrimental relationships and toxic relationships, that men who exhibit exorbitant control over females do so because they want sole access to that individual. and they generally are paranoid of of their sexual partner, the female cheating on them, finding another man, leaving them for someone else. So if they maintain proximity to that individual, they're able to control them. And we see that in family violence quite a bit. That when family violence occurs, the first step is coercive control over that female. So women have more sexual power in endogamous cultures. They say about 34% in which remain with their own kin. So if they're able to stay close to their family, their parents, they're less likely to have this coercive control and access for their the family that they marry into. Mating markets with many interested partners afford more choice than markets that are sparsely populated. So if there are more men, if there are more women, that dynamic is a lot different when males and females who are resources are lacking in a certain culture. And I really like this section because he goes into this idea of the dark triad. So this is psychopathy, Machiavellianism, narcissism, that obviously not all men are sexual predators. And that's a very good thing, right? Science does not bear out that all men are these predators. So if you look at a lot of the more sociological or critical feminist literature, like we saw with Walter's book, they really do argue that all men are potential sexual predators, that all men have this drive and will act it out if they're given the opportunity. If we look more at the psychological and biological literature, that really doesn't bear out. But it does bear out for individuals that are high in dark triad personality characteristics. Again, that's psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism. Those men high in those three areas do act out more aggressively towards women. And interestingly, women can also be high in those characteristics. And when women are high in those characteristics, they also partake in things like cheating, infidelity, sometimes violence, and sort of detrimental gossip that would get people fired and seen very poorly in their communities. So for David Buss, it's not just that people are, men and women have just sort of a cultural drive to do these things. There are personality characteristics that lead them to be more sexually coercive and violent. And we'll see how that plays out as we move forward in the book a little bit more.